I think I sense a spirit coming. Let's call him in a little better. This way, spirit. Come on over. You can do it.
This is surely a heavenly place. I am wondering if I have died. And if so, why have they bothered to dig the hole so deep? I'm afraid that if they fill it in, I shall not be able to rise in time for the second coming. Maybe that's the point. 1 year ago, I spoke to a group of Bedouins encamped on a hillside. After my talk, one of their leaders came up to me, who identified himself as one of their tribal chieftains. We shared the same first name. His name was Mark. Well, I forget the rest. Mr. Twain, he said, I surely enjoyed your talk, and I wondered if you would speak to a larger group of my Bedouin brothers. What would you like me to talk about? I asked. Well, he said, you promised that if we invited you back, you would tell us about the naked natives of the Sandwich Islands. Well, so I did. And there you are, and here I am. So let me tell you some stories. My world travels began when an article I wrote about the San Francisco policeman brutalizing Chinese immigrants landed me in jail. Several editors expressed the opinion that San Francisco was no longer a safe place for me. I agreed. And so I readily accepted when the Sacramento Union newspaper offered to make me their foreign correspondent. I arrived in Honolulu on March 18th, 1866. I soon settled in the American Hotel, where I paid $7 a week for a furnished room and $10 for board. The Sandwich Islands is the loveliest fleet of islands anchored in any ocean. That lovely land, that peaceful land of indolence, where life is like one long continuous Sabbath and the climate is like one delicious summer day. When they die, they go to sleep in one heaven and they wake up in another. On the afternoon I arrived, I encountered a bevy of young native ladies frolicking in the sea, completely naked. I sat down on their clothes to prevent them from being stolen. I begged them to come out, for the sea was rising, and I was satisfied that they were running some risk. But they continued with their game. They were not afraid. They were all expert swimmers and divers and enjoyed themselves to the fullest. They swam races. They splashed, ducked, and tumbled each other about and filled the air with their laughter. They say that the first thing that a native learns how to do is how to swim. How to walk is secondary and it comes later. They tell stories of native men and women swimming ashore from vessels that are miles at sea. More miles indeed than I dare vouch for or even mention. They tell a story of one native who dove down to a depth of 30 or 40 feet and came up with an anvil. When the missionaries first arrived in Honolulu, the native women would pay them frequent friendly visits, clothed not even in a blush. The missionaries found it difficult to convince the natives that there was anything indiscreet about their attire. Finally, the missionaries imported a quantity of hats, bonnets, dresses, and other male and female wearing apparel to try to solve the difficulty. After that, the native women would walk through town stark naked with their robes folded under their arms. They would troop to the missionaries' houses and then they'd proceed to dress. The missionaries made a wider distribution of clothing, and they begged the natives not to come to church the next Sunday naked as usual. And they did not. But in the national spirit of unselfishness, that national spirit of unselfishness caused them to divide up with their neighbors. The next Sabbath, it was difficult for the preachers to maintain a calm countenance in front of their vast congregations. It soon became apparent that the natives really wanted clothing, but only for ornamentation and grandeur. During the reading of a hymn, one brown stately dame swept down the aisle with an world of airs, wearing nothing but a top hat and gloves. Behind her was another dame wearing only a man's shirt. Behind her came in another dame with a flourish, with a brightly colored calico dress, the sleeves tied around her waist, and the rest of the dress dragging behind like a peacock's tail off duty. One stately buck Kanaka strode down the aisle wearing a woman's bonnet, wrong side forward, and the rest of his body unadorned. His comrade entered wearing a pair of pantaloon legs tied around his neck. Behind him, another gentleman came down the aisle wearing a brightly colored necktie, a striped vest, and the rest of his body unadorned. The poor preachers had trouble keeping to the text. The natives sat in the congregation, beaming with pride, completely unaware of any absurdity in their apparel. They would look at each other with happy admiration, and it was apparent that the young girls were taking note of what each other had on, as if they had always lived in a land of Bibles and they knew what churches were for. Here was the beginning of a dawning of civilization. By and by, the natives began a general swapping of garments in the open meeting. And eventually, the missionaries just had to cut the services short with the benediction and dismiss their fantastic assemblage. One grand gala, Saturday, all the natives in town forsook their labors, and those of the countryside journeyed to the city. The white folks had to stay inside because every street was so crowded with galloping cavaliers and cavalieresses, that it was next to impossible to thread one's way through the crowd of horses without becoming crippled. At night, they feasted, and the young ladies danced the lascivious hula hula dance, said to exhibit the very perfection of educated motion and timing. The circle of girls wore little raiment whatsoever other than the flowers in their hair. They performed an infinite series of motions and figures without prompting, and yet so true was their timing, and in such perfect concert did they move their hands, arms, bodies, limbs, and heads. They swayed, they swirled, they twirled. And it was difficult to believe that they were not controlled by some exquisite mechanism. Another day, we encountered a company of naked natives of all ages and both sexes engaged in the national sport of surf bathing. I had never seen anything like it. They would take a short board and they would paddle 300 or 400 yards out to sea, and they would wait for they'd turn toward shore and they'd wait for a particularly prodigious billow to come along. When it did, they would throw their board on top of the wave, they would throw themselves on the board, and they would go whizzing by with the speed of a cannonball. It is difficult to believe that a lightning express train could achieve such speeds. I tried surf bathing once, but I made a failure of it. My board hit the shore in about 2/3 of a second, and I hit the bottom of the ocean at about the same time, filled with several barrels of water. None but the natives ever masters surf bathing thoroughly. The Sandwich Islands is the only nation where education is universal. Everybody there is educated from the highest to lowest. Education breeds a gentle heart. It breeds charity. It breeds forgiveness. Travel is fatal to prejudice, bigotry, and narrow-mindedness. And indeed, a lot of our people could use it on those accounts. Travel breeds wholesome views of people, places, and things. You never saw a stubborn, mean, bigoted, prejudiced person in all your life, but they had stayed in one little corner of the earth and thought that God had created the earth for their particular pleasure and comfort. There is no foreign land that has any particular charm for me other than the Sandwich Islands. There is no place that could occupy my dreams both day and night for more than half my lifetime as it has done. For me, the balmy airs are always blowing. The summer seas are always sparkling in the sun. I can hear the pulsing of its waves in my ears. I can see its garland crags. I can hear its refreshing cascades. I can see its palms swaying in the breeze. I can see its lofty peaks floating above the clouds like islands. I can feel the wild spirit of its wilderness. I can hear the babbling of its brooks. And in my nostrils remains the scent of blossoms that perished years ago. The fear of death is the fear of life. A man who has lived life to its fullest is not afraid to die. I came in with Halley's Comet in 1835. It is coming again next year, and I expect to go out with it. In fact, it will be the biggest disappointment of my life if I don't go out with Halley's Comet. God has undoubtedly said, here are these two unaccountable freaks. They came in together, and they must go out together. Good night.